Welcome to Decoding Cultural Layers, where stories turn into insights and everyday life unfolds in unexpected ways. I'm Gafdilius. Let's peel back the layers together. Frida Kahlo, the self-portrait of pain, defiance, and freedom. Frida Kahlo is one of those rare figures in art history whose name can feel even bigger than her paintings. To call her simply the suffering woman painter is to do injustice both to her life and to her art. She was a woman who stepped out of a forgotten corner of Mexico and dropped herself right into the middle of a male-dominated art world, saying, "I'm here, and I'll do whatever I want." Her body was broken, but her will rarely bent. Roots, family, and childhood. Frida Kahlo's full name is Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón. She was born in 1907 in Coyoacán, Mexico, in the house we now know as La Casa Azul, the Blue House. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a Jewish-German photographer who had emigrated to Mexico. Her mother, a devout Catholic with indigenous Mexican roots. They had 4 daughters. The one who would matter most in Frida's life was her younger sister Cristina. At the age of 6, Frida contracted polio. Her right leg remained thinner and weaker than the other, and she walked with a slight limp. Children called her Frida of the wooden leg. It was a physical wound and a psychological one, but it also sharpened something in her character. While her mother wanted to send the girls to a convent for a strict religious education, her father claimed Frida in a way. Instead of handing her over to the nuns, he chose to raise her himself, with his own intellectual tools. He sent her to German schools, wanted her to read philosophy and literature, to be good at mathematics. Frida, from an early age, refused to play the role of the proper girl. At her older sister's wedding, while everyone else wore frilly dresses, Frida showed up in her father's suit. School, politics, and the crash that put her in bed. After the Mexican Revolution, the National Preparatory School and Humanities faculty began to accept female students for the first time. Among thousands of male students, only 35 women were admitted, and Frida was one of them. There she entered a small circle of students who would later become key figures in Mexican politics, literature, and art. The founder of their group, Alejandro Gómez Arias, became Frida's first great love. The event that changed her life forever came in 1925. One day, Frida and Alejandro boarded a bus together. Another driver tried to overtake a tram. The bus was crushed, and Frida's body was torn apart. A metal handrail pierced her body, entering through her pelvis and exiting near her hip. Numerous bones were broken, internal organs damaged. She spent months in hospital and then at La Casa Azul, encased in plaster and tormenting pain. Doctors told her she would never walk again and that carrying a child to term would be almost impossible. Her father refused to accept the idea of his daughter simply lying there and rotting. He had a large mirror mounted on the ceiling above her bed and gave her paint and brushes. Frida began painting self-portraits, looking at herself through that mirror. For a long time, she could paint almost nothing but herself. That is why people later thought she only painted self-portraits. In reality, it was the condition of her life, a body that could not leave its bed, trapped with only a face in the mirror for company. Despite the doctor's verdict, 2 years later, Frida stood up, walked, and not just walked, she practically ran straight to the Communist Party headquarters and joined. Physical rehabilitation and political awakening happened almost at the same time for her. Diego Rivera. The love story of the elephant and the dove. Through the Communist Party, Frida met the already famous muralist Diego Rivera. He was huge in every sense: massive body, big fame, big appetite for food, politics, and women. In that era, he was something like a rock star, a public communist painting, huge murals in public buildings. Frida went to see him while he was painting a mural at the university. She climbed up with her canvases under her arm. First she called up to him as comrade. Diego didn't even turn around. Then she switched tactics, raised her voice and shouted, "Hey, fatty!" That got his attention. She said something like this, "Look, I'm painting. I need you to tell me if I can be a painter, but don't flirt with me. I need money and I need your opinion. I don't need my life messed up." Diego answered just as bluntly, "If you were truly a real painter, you wouldn't feel the need to show me your paintings. You'd paint whether you lived or died." But when he did look at her canvases, he saw something he had never really seen before. Not the learned skill of copying what one sees, something you can develop with training and practice, but a raw ability to pour pain, lived experience, and the emotional truth of an event straight onto the canvas. That meeting turned into a creative partnership, then into a love story. Because of their size difference and looks, their relationship was called the love of the elephant and the dove in the Mexican press. Frida herself refused even that romantic version. "You're so ugly that this isn't elephant and dove," she joked. "This is frog and dove." Diego drew a little frog with a bird perched on its head as a playful emblem of their love. When they married, Diego already had 2 wives. Frida knew exactly who he was. She agreed to marry on one condition. "I know you will cheat on me," she said. "I only ask for one thing. You will never play with my honor." Diego would fail spectacularly at that single promise. In the United States, art, politics, and the first great collapse. Thanks to Diego's fame, the couple was invited to the United States, San Francisco, Detroit, New York. Diego, the communist muralist painting massive scenes of workers in the heart of capitalism, was welcomed like an exotic star. Frida, on the other hand, hated America almost from day one. When journalists asked for her opinion, she said Detroit was interesting for its factories, but aside from that, the country was awful and stupid, and she wanted to go home. At the same time, she added, "If you want to talk about who the real painter and the real person in this relationship is, that would be me." In America, she became pregnant. The doctors warned her that giving birth would be extremely dangerous given her injuries. Frida remembered how they'd told her she would never walk, and how she'd proved them wrong. She insisted she would give birth. In the end, she suffered a traumatic miscarriage. In the Henry Ford Hospital, broken, bleeding, grieving, she later transformed this experience into one of her most famous paintings, Henry Ford Hospital, with a naked body on a hospital bed, blood, umbilical cord, a fetus, and anatomical forms all connected by thin cords. Meanwhile, Diego had been commissioned to paint a mural in New York's Rockefeller Center. Rockefeller wanted a grand image of workers, a monument to labor in the heart of capital. Diego, true to his convictions, painted the workers, and then inserted a large portrait of Lenin right at the center. Rockefeller could not accept that. He asked Diego to remove Lenin. Diego refused. He was willing to lose the commission instead of erase Lenin. Rockefeller paid him, dismissed him, and then had the entire mural destroyed with sledgehammers. Frida, who already felt foreign and unhappy in the US, pushed to return to Mexico. Diego, intoxicated by fame, wanted to stay, but eventually they went back. La Casa Azul, Cristina, and the worst betrayal. Back in Mexico, Frida's mother died. Frida and Diego did not move back into her father's house. Instead, they had 2 houses built side by side, a blue one and a pink one, joined by a bridge. Frida, constantly toppling gender norms, declared, "The blue house is mine, you will live in the pink one." The feminine pink belonged to Diego, the masculine blue to Frida. But the quiet of Mexico could not compete with the adrenaline of New York for Diego. There were no crowds, no premieres, no glamorous actresses. He sank into boredom and spiraled back into his endless affairs. The deepest wound for Frida came not from a stranger, but from inside the family. Her sister Cristina, who had married a violent, deeply religious man, had been beaten and abused. Frida took her and her children into her home, caring for her nieces and nephews. She even sent Cristina to help in Diego's studio to earn money and stay safe. From the bridge between the two houses, Frida one day looked down and saw Diego and Cristina together. That was not just infidelity. It was the betrayal of the one condition she had laid down. You can cheat, but you will not touch my honour. She threw Cristina out of the house and returned to live with her father at La Casa Azul, but she could never truly cut her sister out of her life. Years later, when Frida lay dying, the one who administered her morphine injections and painkillers was Cristina. Trotsky, revolution, love and divorce. In the story of Frida and Diego, Leon Trotsky became both the reason they reconciled and later the reason they split for good. Trotsky, one of the founding figures of the Soviet Union alongside Lenin and Stalin, was forced into exile after his ideological battles with Stalin. He wandered through several countries and eventually arrived in Mexico. Diego petitioned the Mexican government to grant Trotsky asylum and arranged for him, his wife and his entourage to stay at La Casa Azul. The house, with its high walls and inner courtyard, was like a small fortress. There, the aging revolutionary with a limp and the young painter with 2 canes met. Frida's intelligence, irreverence and fierce independence fascinated Trotsky. She, in turn, was drawn to his charisma and his story. Trotsky's wife noticed the tension between them. She saw them discussing revolution late into the night, exchanging papers and ideas with a kind of intimacy that was not just intellectual. An argument followed. Trotsky, who did not lie to his wife and did not want her to be humiliated, chose to leave the house. He knew he could not expel Frida from her own home, but he could remove himself and his wife from that situation. They moved nearby. Shortly afterwards, Trotsky was assassinated with an ice axe. When Diego learned that Frida had slept with Trotsky, it was a line he could not tolerate. Frida had forgiven countless affairs. Diego, who had betrayed her over and over, was the one who now asked for a divorce. Pain, operations, and a body that wouldn't heal. The pain that began with the bus accident never left Frida. On the contrary, it multiplied with time. Her toes turned gangrenous and had to be amputated. Later, her leg was cut off below the knee. In her diary, she wrote, "They amputated my leg. They left me with 100 years of pain." She travelled to New York again to have a metal rod inserted into her spine. The procedure did not ease her suffering. It made things worse. Over the course of her life, she underwent at least 32 operations and wore 29 different corsets, of cloth, metal, wood, and plaster. Some have argued that not all of these operations were medically necessary, that they sometimes served as a way to pull Diego's attention back to her or to punish herself and him at the same time. Whether or not that is true, one fact survives: she never escaped pain. In her diary, she wrote, "There was not a single day in my life without pain. Learning to live with pain may be the most horrible thing of all." Another escape route was alcohol. Her doctor begged her to stop. Frida responded with the black humour that never quite left her. "I drank to drown my pain, but the bastards learned how to swim." The paintings, colourful and never cheerful. Despite the bright colours, exotic clothes and vivid fruit that often appear in her work, Frida's paintings are rarely cheerful. Most of them deal with pain, loneliness, death, dismemberment and emotional rupture. And yet she did much more than self-portraiture. Alongside her 55 self-portraits, she painted still lifes, symbolic scenes and narrative works, filled with animals, plants, political references and Mesoamerican imagery. Some of her key works include The Bus, 1929, a simple wooden bus filled with Mexican people from different social classes, all sitting side by side. It reflects Diego's communism and the idea of class equality. Nobody standing, everybody seated, sharing space. The Two Fridas, 1939, painted after her divorce from Diego, this iconic double self-portrait shows two Fridas, one in a white Victorian wedding dress, the other in a Tehuana dress reflecting her mother's indigenous heritage. Both hearts are exposed. A small portrait of Diego in a locket feeds veins that connect to both hearts. The Western Frida cuts the vein. It is the visual statement. When I became more Western, when I tried to fit his world, I lost him. Self-portrait with cropped hair, 1940. Frida in a man's suit, hair chopped off, locks of hair scattered on the floor. It is both a rejection of conventional femininity and a message to Diego. Look what I can cut away and still remain myself. The dream, the bed, Frida lying in her bed below, with death resting in the upper level of the same bed. It is a picture of living side by side with death as a constant roommate, the broken column. Her body split open, spine replaced with a cracked classical column, nails driven into her skin, corset holding her together. A raw representation of physical and emotional fragmentation. The Wounded Deer, 1946. Frida's face on the body of a stag pierced by arrows in a forest. A symbol of repeated wounding of a body that cannot escape being hunted. The Suicide of Dorothy Hale, 1938, commissioned as a memorial portrait of the American actress Dorothy Hale, who had jumped to her death from a high-rise. Instead of painting a flattering likeness, Frida depicted the moment of the fall and the crumpled, bloodied body on the pavement. It is a brutal refusal to romanticize tragedy, even when a grieving mother would have preferred a softer image. Viva la Vida, Watermelons, one of her last works, a simple still life of cut watermelons with the words Viva la Vida carved into them. After a lifetime of agony, her final note is both bitterly ironic and strangely tender. Long live life. In 2006, her painting, The Roots, was sold for $5.6 million, at the time making it the most expensive work by a female artist ever sold at auction. Today, Frida's canvases continue to break records, and her image circulates endlessly on posters, T-shirts and tattoos. Criticism, misunderstanding, and a feminist before the word arrived. Frida was known and respected in her lifetime. In Mexico, yes, but also in Paris and New York. Still, much of the myth-making around her came later, as different political and cultural movements adopted her as their emblem. Her unibrow and slight moustache have been discussed almost as much as her paintings. In Paris, some critics seemed more interested in her facial hair than in her compositions. She darkens her brows and moustache just to represent Mexico alone, some said, as if she were costume designing her own face. In reality, her refusal to pluck her eyebrows, remove her moustache or shave her armpits was not a quirky whim, it was a stance. Long before the word feminism became widely used in that sense, Frida was living out a bodily rebellion against the norms imposed on women. She wore men's suits, Tehuana dresses, corsets, rags, whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. Some art historians criticized her for romanticizing indigenous culture or for being caught between elite Paris New York circles and a mythologized Indian-Mexican identity. They claimed her style never fully settled, that she moved restlessly between images of skyscrapers and Mexican forests, between the suicide of an American actress and a wounded deer in the jungle. But Frida was not a product of the academy. She did not have the kind of formal education that gives you a school, a movement, a label. She built her entire artistic language out of pain, politics, dreams, and a body held together with straps and steel. In that sense, she doesn't neatly belong to any Dashism. Instead, the Dashisms came later and tried to claim her. The final years, the exhibition and the exit. Toward the end of her life, Frida organized her first solo exhibition in Mexico. For her, this was more important than Paris or New York. Mexico was home. She wanted to be seen there on her own terms. Her doctor forbade her from leaving her bed. Diego said he would open the exhibition on her behalf, that this should be enough. It wasn't. Frida found a loophole. She didn't get out of bed. She took the bed with her. 4 men carried her, mattress and all, into the gallery. She arrived at her own exhibition in triumph, lying on her back, laughing, drinking tequila, greeting guests from her mobile throne of pain. Shortly before her death, she drew a black angel in her diary and wrote, "Exit is near. I am very happy. I hope never to return." The idea of reincarnation terrified her. The thought of reliving those physical torments in another body was unbearable. She left instructions that her body be cremated. "I don't want to meet this body again, neither here nor anywhere else," her words seemed to say. In 1954, the official cause of death was recorded as pulmonary embolism. Her nurse, however, said that on the night she died, Frida took far more painkillers than prescribed. Her death, like her life, sits at the crossroads of choice and fate. Her coffin was wrapped in the red flag, with the hammer and sickle. State officials stood at attention. For a woman who had never behaved properly for a single day, there was something darkly poetic in receiving a state farewell. Frida Kahlo's legacy. In a time when women were not allowed to attend university in Mexico and sports were considered unthinkable for them, Frida may have been the first Mexican woman to do physical exercise in a modern, systematic way. Her father knew that movement was crucial for her polio-stricken leg, and he encouraged it. She never had children. Instead, she filled La Casa Azul with cats, dogs, monkeys, a deer, and, of course, paintings. She cared for her nieces and nephews, she taught students, she gave lessons from her bed when she could no longer go to the university. She was not just the suffering artist, nor was she merely a feminist icon printed on tote bags. She was a complete human being, jealous, passionate, vengeful, generous, funny, fragile, indestructible, all of that at once. Maybe that is why she feels so powerful still, not because she was flawless, but because she never pretended to be. People sometimes say that for a few artists, their name grows larger than their canvases. In Frida's case, her life itself became one continuous self-portrait. A life lived as if the world were a canvas onto which she painted her pain, her loves, her roots, and her refusal to bow.